Thank you so much. That has also added to one's self-confidence in terms of addressing such a distinguished assembly of people who are truly interested in foreign affairs and who have, in many, many capacities, contributed to the study and the practice of foreign policy around the world. Your Excellency Hassan Wirajuda, Foreign Minister of the Republic of Indonesia, Your Excellency R.M. Marty Nata Legawa, Foreign Minister of the Republic of Indonesia, two people I have watched over a long period, reading their speeches, listening to them, and I had the great honor also to welcome Pambati at our institution back in Delhi, where he had given a brilliant speech. So, sir, it is an honor to share the stage with you today. The first time I came to this beautiful and great country was a long time back, 1985. I came here as a young Deputy Chief of Mission in the Indian Embassy to Jakarta. And when I left in 1989, after a full 4-year tenure, I realized that Indonesia had become a part of my life. But even then, I did not imagine that almost 4 decades later, the legendary institution of Indonesia, CSIS, would think of inviting anybody less than a former foreign minister to come and address you on this momentous occasion. So thank you very much, distinguished leadership of CSIS, and I take this opportunity to recognize among all of you two very special people for me, the Ambassador of India to Indonesia and the Ambassador of India to ASEAN. By their presence, they have lent support to this great event, but I know that people sitting here on the stage are all track 2 people, and they are going to talk about track 2 perspectives. Thank you also, Dr. Lina, for giving ample time. She said 20 to 30 minutes, and I told her last night, I will only speak as long as I can hold the attention of this audience. I know you have a long day ahead, but we have the advantage, we are the early birds, and so we have to say our piece in a manner that makes some sense. It is a real honor for me to be here today because CSIS is an institution that I have followed ever since I served here. This was barely 10, 12-year-old institution then, fledgling institution, and I think what it has achieved in these past decades is truly remarkable. We don't have to say that this is Indonesia's #1 think tank, but it is a think tank that has survived on its own, asserting the independence of foreign policy intellectuals and scholars and all those who support it, and it's a kind of a role model for a think tank around the world, and certainly for us in Asia. So I feel very honored truly to be here. But what is more important, or in fact what is the most important thing, is that our Indonesian friends thought of bringing somebody from India because it is Bandung Conference's 70th anniversary. Bandung was a landmark and an unprecedented reunion of top leaders of an array of emerging nations at that time. It may surprise you to know that 29 countries selected for this purpose from Asia and Africa represented more than half the population of the world at that time. So those 29 spoke for half of the world. Bandung was the symbol of Asia's resurgence. It was the promise of the liberation, full liberation of Africa. It heralded the beginning of the non-aligned movement, and it laid the foundations of South-South cooperation. This is the importance of Bandung, and I think CSIS is doing an immense service by reminding us, but especially the young generation of today, as to the symbolic meaning of Bandung. So thank you very much, CSIS, for doing this great service. But I also mentioned to Pa Yusuf Wanandi yesterday, whom I had the honor to know then. I asked him yesterday as to how old he was when Bandung happened. And he said he was 18-year-old, so obviously he remembers Bandung much better than many of us who were 5 or 6-year-old at that time. But Bandung has become a part of our life, and the point I'm making here is CSIS had some kind of a premonition. When they thought of doing this conference 6 months back, they knew that something would happen, and that will make Bandung even more relevant, more topical, and more significant to the world. So Bandung's celebration today, in this period of turbulent 20s of the present century, is important. We face a poly crisis in the world, encompassing the COVID pandemic, the Ukraine war, the multiple conflicts in West Asia, and now the change of administration in the US. The last one has triggered multiple changes at the global level, and only appropriately India's External Affairs Minister, S. Jaishankar, called it a churn. A former ambassador of India to Indonesia, Ambassador Shyam Saran, called it a topsy-turvy world. A former foreign minister of South Korea and president of Asia Society called it a paradigm shift. It's a change, the meaning of which all of us are trying to understand the implications of. So what is this change that the scholars, journalists, diplomats are talking about? One does not have much time, but I would very quickly like to identify 8 key trends that seem to explain what is happening in the world today. First, there is the US withdrawal from multilateral institutions. There is clearly exit from WHO, from the Paris Agreement on climate change, tough attitude towards the UN, and an attitude of either hostility or neglect towards BRICS and G20. Second, there is the heightened territorial interest, which has been described as, by the media, as the return of the empire. And I'm referring here to this whole business of taking back the Panama Canal, renaming the Gulf of Mexico, viewing Canada as the 51st state. They plan to acquire Greenland one way or another, and the scheme to turn Gaza into the Middle East's Riviera. The third trend is a complex new message to by US to Europe. Please become self-reliant for security. Inverted commas, stop fleecing us. And please settle down for peace in Europe, because there are other challenging developments happening in the world. Fourth trend, the signal to Ukraine and Russia is unmistakable. To stop the war on terms set by the US mediation, which includes major concessions by Ukraine on territory and admission to NATO, and some climb down by Russia. The fifth trend is clearly relating to West Asia, where US supports and covers Israel, views Iran as a major threat, and wishes to work with the Gulf states and India on the IMEC project. The sixth, and this is very important, in our view, in my view, Washington's China policy is in the process of evolution. The Asian giant is viewed as an economic threat and will be treated as such, but a resolution through negotiations remains a distinct possibility. Yet, on the larger strategic implications in the Indo-Pacific, the US probably awaits a presidential visit to Beijing. Meanwhile, and this is coming out clearly, the administration seems less interested in other regions of the world, namely Central Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and above all, Africa. The seventh trend is, of course, the one which has totally dominated the headlines around the world, is the announcement about new tariffs on 2nd April and subsequent fast-paced developments. Many experts now predict the trifecta of a global trade war, disruption of supply chains, inflation, and also recession. The Prime Minister of Singapore, Lawrence Wong, he said clearly, the world witnesses a seismic change in the global order. The era of free trade and globalization is over, and I quote him again, we are entering a new phase, one that is more arbitrary, protectionist, and dangerous. This is what he said. And the final trend, as I noticed, is that with G7 unity in tatters and the Atlantic Alliance coming under considerable pressure, the quotient of multipolarity has increased considerably. This also imparts a new momentum to regionalism and the impulse to strengthen regional institutions ranging from the ASEAN and BIMSTEC. An eminent Indian foreign policy thinker wrote recently, all geopolitics is regional now. So the sum and substance of these trends is captured in only one sentence, and it is this: the old order is giving way, but the contours of the new order are still unclear. So in this background, the central question that Dr. Lina has asked, what is the impact on the global south? This is where we have to reflect. And I think we have to first begin by noting that the clear thread running from the Bandung principles to the core elements of the agenda of the global south today. All those who might wonder as to why we are discussing Bandung need to be reminded that the global south cannot be understood and appreciated without its history. And that history began here in Indonesia in April 1955. And that is why I totally endorse and support what Pa Tamuri, the Executive Director of CSIS, said in his opening remarks. What does the global south want? Forget long scholarly essays and long speeches. I think they express opposition by a large chunk of humanity to exploitation, domination, injustice, And they stand for advocacy of equity, fairness, and inclusivity. This is what the Global South wants. And therefore, we have to recognize that the immediate impact of the trends which I have mentioned, this is the marginalization, or some scholars say re-marginalization of the developing countries. The global agenda of developing countries is clear. It involves very clear things: debt relief, more funding for energy transition, more funding for financing, help in getting technology, to be treated fairly and equally, and all that is coming under serious pressure. And here I bring in very quickly a point which Padamuri made earlier. In G20, 4 developing country presidencies worked together, starting with Indonesia, moving to India, then Brazil, and now South Africa. And they tried to put very successfully, if I may say, a pro-South orientation to the agenda of G20. And right up to the time of India and even Brazil, they succeeded considerably. At least the agenda looked good. But you know now how South Africa is facing headwinds. They are having difficulties, and I'm sure in the afternoon it would be our turn to listen to African diplomats, and therefore I don't have to preempt what they might say. So in this context, just last 2 questions very quickly. What is India's approach? India's leadership, strategic community, business, and media are heavily engaged in deciphering the implications of the changing world order. They are reflecting on a strategy how to deal with this. India's game is very clear. It is a blend of fundamental principles, values, and pragmatism. It is this trend, this blend that molds our foreign policy. India's policy of multi-alignment and the stress on strategic autonomy help the nation to navigate the path in this fast-changing environment. I should cite very clearly, and I agree, that confrontation is not the strategy. And on this critical question of US tariffs, I may say that New Delhi foresaw the future. Very swiftly arranged an early interaction between President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Modi in Washington in February, and secured an agreement to launch negotiations for a bilateral trade deal. Discussions on the deal are proceeding well and with a sense of urgency. And yet, at the same time, I quote Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal, who stressed that the government of India follows India first approach and would never negotiate at gunpoint. So it's a very principled approach, and it is a pragmatic approach, and that is what really counts. It hopes to further receive the US President in India later in the year when the Quad Summit will take place. And in the coming days, we are expecting 2 more important visitors from the US, the Vice President and his wife, and the National Security Advisor. So we are on the guard, we follow our principles, but we stay open to dialogue. That is what India's approach is. And at the same time, if you ask, what is India doing for the Global South? I know that question is stirring your mind, in your mind. And I would like to remind this distinguished audience what India already did in the last 2 years. India's initiative to host 3 editions of the Voice of Global South Summit between January 2023 and August 2024 needs to be noted and commended. In the past decade, India has invested much effort and resources to deepen cooperation with the Afro-Asian region. Further, Prime Minister Narendra Modi updated his 2015 vision of Sagar into Mahasagar, which stands for Mutual and Holistic Advancement for Security and Growth across regions. I do not have time to explain the implications, but maybe that will come out in the discussion later. But my final point, dear friends, relates to India-Indonesia equation. To promote the cause of the Global South, our two countries need not reinvent the wheel. Our top leaders, President Prabowo Subianto and Prime Minister Modi, have already approved a brilliant roadmap. In January 2025, when the Indonesian president was the chief guest at India's Republic Day celebration, they welcomed existing close coordination between the two countries in the multilateral fora. Indonesia appreciated India's initiative in organizing these summits that I mentioned to you. And finally, the two governments are also keen to expand their dialogue and cooperation relating to BRICS, ASEAN in particular, Indo-Pacific initiatives, and also trilateral cooperation. So all that we need to do, in my view, is to double down on a meticulous and timely implementation of the decisions taken at the highest political level. Final thought, dear friends, our world is indeed adrift today. This perception forms a most compelling imperative for our two countries to work more closely and collaboratively in the future. The spirit of the Bandung Conference and its Dasa Sila, 10 principles, must guide us and also others in the quest for a just, equitable, and inclusive world order. Thank you for your attention.